Witnesses say Anthony told Metcalf, quote, "Touch me and see what happens," while reaching inside his bag before a brief scuffle, after Metcalf asked Anthony to leave his team's tent during a track meet.
A regional high school track meet, a Wednesday morning in April. Hundreds of teenagers, coaches, parents, all gathered at a stadium in Frisco, Texas, for nothing more than a day of competition. The kind of event that happens every single weekend across America without incident. Nobody came to that stadium expecting anything other than a race. By 10 o'clock that morning, a 17-year-old boy was on the ground with a stab wound to the chest. His teammates were screaming, students were running, and the person who put that knife in his chest was already fleeing through the crowd. It started over a tent. That is the part that stops people cold when they first hear this story. Not a rivalry, not a history of violence between two families, not a planned confrontation, a pop-up tent put up to keep athletes dry during a rainstorm, a dispute over who was sitting underneath it, 40 seconds of escalation, and then a 17-year-old boy who would never see his 18th birthday. What happened next was almost as shocking as the stabbing itself. Within hours, this case had left the courtroom and entered the internet. Two teenagers, one black, one white, in a suburb of Dallas. Social media did not wait for facts. It did not wait for a trial, for evidence, for witnesses, or for a verdict. It picked sides immediately, and it picked them along racial lines. Death threats were made. Home addresses were posted publicly. Both families were swatted repeatedly while they were still processing whether their children were going to survive or stand trial. A tragedy became a flashpoint before the blood had dried. Before we go any further, this case involves the violent death of a teenager and testimony that a judge in a courtroom warned adults about before it was read aloud. We are going to cover it with honesty and care, but please be aware this story does not get easier as it goes on. If you are new here, welcome to Noir Vault. Hit subscribe and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. We cover cases that the news cycle moves on from too quickly. This community does not move on, and this story, more than most, deserves the full picture. Because the full picture is far more complicated than anything trending on your timeline. Two teenagers, one morning, one decision that took seconds and destroyed everything, and a country that used their names to fight a war that had nothing to do with either of them. This is the story of Austin Metcalf and the track meet that divided a nation. Frisco, Texas is the kind of place people move to on purpose. Safe suburbs, good schools, Friday night lights, and the kind of community where parents still show up to watch their kids compete. By 2025, it had become one of the fastest growing cities in America. Two of the teenagers who called it home were Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony. They had never met. They attended rival high schools less than 10 miles apart, and until the morning of April 2nd, 2025, neither of them had any reason to know the other existed. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old and a junior at Memorial High School. He was a football linebacker and a track and field athlete competing in the 100 meters, discus, and shot put. His father, Jeff, described him as a boy, a twin, a son, a leader, and a true warrior. His mother, Megan, called him a morning kid, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately made people feel at ease. He had a twin brother named Hunter who competed alongside him. By every account from people who knew him, Austin was not the kind of person who went looking for trouble. His mother would later stand in a courtroom and tell the world he was a natural peacemaker. Karmelo Anthony had a different kind of story. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he moved to the Frisco area in 2021 with his family. He was the oldest of 4 children. At Centennial High School, he carried a 3.7 GPA, was elected captain of the football team, and competed in track and field. His mother, Kala Hayes, described a son she was proud of. His coaches trusted him with leadership. On paper, Karmelo Anthony was the kind of teenager that adults held up as an example. 2 high-achieving student athletes from the same suburb. Different schools, different backgrounds, no shared history, no prior conflict. The kind of collision that should never happen. It did. Before we go further, if you are watching Noir Vault for the first time, subscribe now. We do not skim these stories. Every name in this case matters, every detail has weight, and you are going to want to be here for all of it. The morning of April 2nd, 2025 started like any other regional track meet in Frisco ISD. Hundreds of student athletes arrived at David Kuykendall Stadium on the campus of Memorial High School. Coaches set up team areas. Athletes warmed up. Parents and spectators filled the stands. Then the rain came. When it started coming down, teams moved under whatever shelter they could find. Memorial High School had a pop-up tent set up as their designated team area in the bleachers. Athletes from other schools filtered into the space to get out of the rain. Witnesses at trial described it as a fairly common and informal arrangement at track meets. Students from different schools mixing under shared cover was not unusual. What became unusual was Karmelo Anthony. Multiple witnesses testified that Anthony had settled into the memorial tent and was asked to leave. The request was not aggressive. Students from Memorial, including Austin Metcalf, told him the space was their team area. Anthony refused. Witnesses testified he became confrontational, using profanity, and at one point challenging students around him. One witness testified Anthony said, and these are the words entered into evidence, that he was not leaving. Austin Metcalf told him he was not going to fight at a track meet. That detail matters. In the middle of a rising confrontation, the boy who ended up dead was the one trying to de-escalate. Then Anthony reached into his bag. Witnesses saw him pull out a black folding knife. He told Metcalf, according to the arrest report, "Touch me and see what happens." Metcalf shoved him. Anthony stabbed him once in the chest and immediately fled the scene. What followed those seconds was chaos. Students screamed, athletes scattered, coaches and school staff rushed to Austin, who was conscious and calling out that he had been stabbed. CPR was attempted on site. It was not enough. Austin Metcalf was transported to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. The medical examiner, Dr. Elizabeth Ventura of Collin County, would later testify that the stab wound penetrated Austin's heart. 2.5 inches. Not survivable. Anthony was identified by witnesses almost immediately and was arrested shortly after leaving the stadium. He told a school resource officer on bodycam that Metcalf had put his hands on him first. From that moment forward, 2 separate stories began to form around the same set of facts, and the country would spend the next year fighting about which one was true. Karmelo Anthony was charged with first-degree murder. He was 17 years old at the time of the stabbing, but under Texas law, 17-year-olds are tried as adults. He pleaded not guilty, and his defense team immediately established their position. Anthony acted in self-defense. He felt threatened. He was outnumbered. The shove from Metcalf was the physical trigger. What happened next was a split-second decision born of fear, not intent to kill. The prosecution saw it differently from the beginning. Their argument was direct. Anthony brought a knife to a high school track meet. He refused to leave when asked. He escalated the confrontation verbally. He reached for the knife before Metcalf touched him. And when Metcalf shoved him, Anthony did not retreat. He stabbed an unarmed teenager through the heart and ran. While the legal arguments were being built, something else was happening outside the courtroom that would shape how this case was perceived across the entire country. Anthony is black. Metcalf was white. That fact on its own would not necessarily have defined the case. But social media did not leave it alone. Within hours of the story breaking, the case was framed on various platforms as a racial flashpoint. Fundraising pages appeared for both families and collectively raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations. Online communities formed around each side. And then it turned darker. Both families had their home addresses posted publicly. Death threats were made against the Anthonys and the Metcalfs. Jeff Metcalf would later reveal he had been swatted 6 times. Anthony's mother, Kayla Hayes, held a press conference in April 2025 to address the harassment her family was receiving, pointing out that her 3 younger children and her husband had done nothing to deserve being targeted. The harassment of both families was not a footnote. It was a parallel crisis running alongside the legal case, one driven entirely by people who had no connection to either teenager and who were using 2 grieving families as weapons in a much larger cultural argument. Both the prosecution and the defense stated clearly during the trial that race was not a factor in what happened under that tent. The confrontation began over seating. It ended because one person had a knife and chose to use it. Whether that choice constituted murder or self-defense was the only question the jury was asked to answer. The nation, however, had already made up its mind, multiple times over. The trial of Karmelo Anthony opened at Collin County District Court in McKinney, Texas, before Judge John Roach, Jr. Cameras were banned from the courtroom. The only visual record produced during the trial came from courtroom sketch artist Pat Lopez. Jurors were sequestered and ordered off social media, a precaution that spoke directly to how toxic the public conversation around the case had become. The prosecution, led by Bill Werski, called 21 witnesses over the course of the trial. Student athletes from Memorial, Centennial, and Frisco high schools testified about what they saw and heard in the bleachers before and during the stabbing. Their accounts were consistent on the critical points. Anthony was asked to leave. He refused. He escalated. He reached into his bag before the physical contact happened. Multiple witnesses heard him say, "Touch me and see what happens." One witness heard Austin say he was not going to fight at a track meet. And then the knife. Dr. Elizabeth Ventura delivered the most clinical and devastating testimony of the trial. She told the jury that Austin Metcalf was stabbed directly through the heart. The wound was 2.5 inches in length. Judge Roach warned the courtroom before she testified. Austin's family left the room. Ventura's conclusion was unambiguous. The wound was not survivable. The defense called a limited number of witnesses. Their most significant witness in the sentencing phase was Anthony's mother, Kala Hayes. Anthony visibly wept as she testified. Defense attorney Toby Shook argued throughout that Anthony had been surrounded, physically provoked, and acted in a moment of genuine fear. He pushed the jury to consider sudden passion, a legal concept under Texas law that acknowledges a person acted under extreme emotional provocation rather than calculated intent. Had the jury accepted it, Anthony's sentence would have been significantly reduced. They did not accept it. Anthony did not testify in his own defense. Detective Bo Riley of the Frisco Police Department's Crimes Against Children unit, who had interviewed witnesses at the stadium on the day of the stabbing, was called by the defense and testified that pocket knives with blades under 5.5 inches are not illegal to carry under Texas law. The implication being that Anthony had not done anything unlawful simply by having the knife. The prosecution countered that the issue was never whether he could carry it. The issue was what he chose to do with it. During closing arguments, prosecutor Werski reminded the jury of the moment the Centennial coach told his team to leave the track because of the rain, and every single athlete complied. He asked a teenage witness directly whether when someone asks you to leave, you leave. The witness said yes. That exchange encapsulated the prosecution's entire case. Anthony was asked to leave. He had a choice. He made it. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours. On June 9, 2026, Karmelo Anthony was found guilty of first-degree murder. The same jury sentenced him to 35 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole consideration after serving half of that sentence. One day after the verdict, Anthony filed a notice of appeal and submitted a pauper oath requesting appointed legal representation for that process. The sentencing phase gave the Metcalf family 30 minutes to speak directly to the man who killed their son and brother. They used every second of it. Megan Metcalf stood before the court and addressed Anthony directly. She described walking past an empty bedroom every day. She said her once full and loud house had gone completely quiet. She told the courtroom that her conversations with Austin are now one-sided, held at his grave. She said her son was not someone who just died. He was murdered. And while Anthony had received a 35-year sentence, she told him plainly that she had been handed a lifetime without her child. Jeff Metcalf spoke through visible grief and undisguised rage. He brought photographs of Austin that were displayed on a large screen as he spoke. He described watching his son grow from a newborn gripping his finger to an athlete he genuinely believed had a professional career ahead of him. He told Anthony directly not to look down while he was speaking. He said the case was never about race. It was about right and wrong. He said he had been swatted 6 times. He said his son's death had destroyed the person he used to be. And then, in the most unexpected moment of the entire sentencing, he said he had forgiven Anthony the day it happened. Not for Anthony's sake, because carrying that weight alongside grief would have finished him. Hunter Metcalf, Austin's twin brother, also delivered a statement. The image of a twin speaking about losing the person who had been present for every single day of his life required no dramatization. It carried its own weight. The Metcalf family has since established a scholarship in Austin's name so that his leadership and character extend beyond the circumstances of his death. As for the wider questions this case raised, they remain open. Texas law permits the carrying of folding knives under certain blade lengths. The question of whether a high school track meet is an appropriate place for a student to be armed with, one was not answered by the verdict. The question of how social media amplifies racial tension around criminal cases involving teenagers, destroys the privacy of grieving families, and corrupts the public conversation before any facts have been established, was not answered either. Those are systemic questions that one conviction cannot resolve. What the verdict did answer was the narrower question the jury was given. Karmelo Anthony brought a knife to a track meet, refused to leave when asked, escalated a confrontation, and stabbed an unarmed teenager through the heart. The jury found that was murder, not self-defense, not sudden passion, not an accident. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old, a twin, a linebacker, a shot-put competitor, a morning person who made people feel at ease when he walked into a room. He went to a track meet on a Wednesday in April and never came home. That is the answer to the question this case began with. A normal morning, a rainstorm, a tent, 40 seconds, and a decision that destroyed two families, divided a country, and ended a life that had barely started. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear the full picture rather than a 30-second clip. Subscribe to Noir Vault if you have not already. We cover the cases that deserve more than a headline. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. We read everyone. Austin Metcalf, 17 years old, remembered.